called Parks for All. A note before we begin, the program is being recorded, and the recording will be available unedited on our Civic Buzz website under the League of Women Voters Minneapolis. Also, we'll take questions at the end, and you can put them in the chat at any time, or use the raise hand function after the presentation if you want to ask your question yourself. So our guests tonight are Carrie and Christensen and Madeline Hudek. Am I saying that right, Madeline?
Close enough.
Oh, how do you say it?
Hudek.
Hudek, okay. I'm gonna say it right. Carrie Christensen and Madeline Hudek from the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, or MPRB. Carrie is the project manager for the Park Board's comprehensive plan. She's a senior planner at MPRB, where she works on park policy, design, and community engagement. She has a master's of landscape architecture from the U of M and a BA in urban studies from Stanford University. Her cross-sector work combines facilitation, community organizing, project management, data analysis, planning, and environmental design processes. She's a published author, adjunct faculty at the U of M, and was a 2001 Fulbright Scholar, among other honors. She's also an owner of Landbridge Ecological. She considers her work to be at the intersection of equity and environment, and has consulted with communities across the country around strategic planning, creative community engagement, and resilient design. She was born in Switzerland and raised in California, but she considers Minnesota one of her many homes and currently lives in the Twin Cities with her husband and 2 kids. Madeline Hudek is a data insights analyst with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Her work includes community engagement, park planning and implementation, data collection and analysis, and developing data tools for communications and decision-making. Madeline holds a degree in urban planning from the University of Minnesota. So, without further ado, I will let Carrie take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Hello, and sorry about the technology issues. I have funny things with Zoom. But I'm so glad to be here tonight. I've spoken with the group over the years, and we're just so thrilled to have you interested in how is it going with Parks for All and the comprehensive plan? How are we tracking? How are we, actually implementing this long range plan that we worked for years, actually developing the plan? And so I've asked Madeline Hudek to join me in sharing information tonight, because she's really been a key staff in building our measurement tools. So we'll spend a lot of tonight, as Lisa mentioned, she really, in her deep dive for the study guide, she said so much of it was about sleuthing and finding links and information and just navigating all of it, what's in there in the Park Board website around the plan and how we're tracking it. And so tonight is part tour of the resources that are out there, and we'll do our best to highlight moments of measurement and tracking, but do feel free to follow up with additional questions over the next few weeks as you meet with your study groups. And we're always happy to share information with data enthusiasts, especially because a lot of love has gone into measuring and tracking progress of the plan, not just the plan itself. I think that as we work to develop the plan, one of the first questions out of many people's mouths was, well, what'd you do with the last plan? What'd you accomplish? And actually, that was a huge part of inspiring sort of this idea that any kind of strategy or goal that we set, we want to make sure we know how to measure it. We want to make sure to understand our stake and our role, and what are the dials that we're moving for any of those long-term visions. So the plan was built not only with that in mind, but we also we're keeping in the back of our heads, like, we've got to build tools that are actually helping us track that really clearly, so that we as staff can answer that question in 15 years when we work on the next plan. We'll have a very clear sense of, this is what we've done, this is what we've accomplished. And so again, we're thrilled to be here today to share that with all of you politically savvy humans. So thank you for having us. And so I'm going to start out by just giving a quick overview of Parks for All and what it is. It's one of my favorite communications tools that came out about the plan. when we first developed it. And it's a video that was produced by the youth design team. So we actually hired a group of 10 youth from across the city to help us develop the plan. They did community engagement. They actually wrote policy recommendations for the plan. They shadowed all sorts of divisions and departments. They did research across the country. So really thought of them as experts and staff in this process. And then they also developed this wonderful communications tool about what the plan is. And I think it does a wonderful job of sort of a synopsis of that. So I'm going to share my screen here.
Parks for All by the Youth Design Team.
We live in a busy city with a lot of buildings, traffic, and fast-paced living. Our parks offer the opportunity to be in nature, play sports, and enjoy programs with our families and friends in almost every neighborhood.
These beautiful natural spaces mean so much to our communities, and it's up to us to make sure that they are open and welcoming places that serve us all.
The Minneapolis parks are located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary Dakota land. They are the original stewards of the land we walk on, play on, and enjoy. They were removed from the land through violence and have fought since then to be acknowledged and respected. We can listen, learn, and act to honor them and their land now and in the future.
Part of making sure our parks are parks for all is having ways to ask our communities what they envision and need now and into the future. Parks for All is MPRB's comprehensive planning process that is working to envision the priorities and goals for our park system and staff for the next decade.
Talking to the community, we are hearing what people want to see in their parks.
Innovation,
Like
geocaching programs.
Recreation, concerns,
Recreation, more basketball
swings,
courts.
basketball, no trash courts in the lake. I wish my parks had more recycling.
My park
and
needs
compost.
yoga outside.
Park policies and plans also help us build on what we learn from communities to guide the park board into the future. We see the process like the growth of a tree. Community engagement and MPRB plans and policies will create the foundation and feed the plan as it grows.
Parks for All was adopted in fall 2021 and will guide the future of our parks through 2036. It sets a new mission that defines the core functions of the park board, focusing more on equity and wildlife.
The new plan also includes a new set of values to guide how commissioners, staff, and volunteers do their work.
All goals and strategies are based on a set of features we're planning for. Some features are considered assets and some are or will be challenges.
9 goals will direct future development, operations, and maintenance of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation System through 2036. Goals state what we plan to accomplish in the next decade. They connect to the futures we're planning for and are guided by our values. In the next 15 years, we envision a park system that navigates a balance of equity, ecology, and recreation in new ways through a focus on the following goals.
Multiple strategies provide guidance on how to accomplish each goal. Every 4 years, the 9 newly elected park commissioners will select a set of strategies to prioritize during their term.
Progress on strategies and goals will be measured and reported each year. This is how the park board and the community we serve can track how we are doing and make sure we are accountable to the vision we are committed to through 2036.
To dig deeper into the plan and learn more about the vision for our amazing park system in Minneapolis, visit www.minneapolisparks.org/parksforall. Thousands of people, including staff, community, elected officials, and agency partners, helped inform the vision. We hope that everyone sees themselves in the plan, will work with us to bring it to life. Thank you.
The Youth Design Team would like to thank all the people who helped make this film possible.
All right. Isn't that fun? I hope the sound was okay. I just love that video. And so, with Parks for All, I think that video gets at the heart of why it's such an exciting document still to this day is that I think of it as a participatory policymaking process. So it was a document that was developed by, I'd say there was over 150 authors that contributed to the plan itself. There was initially, in the beginning stages of the plan, we knew that it was roughly going to be this sort of decade look out. And as we developed the plan, we thought, and to sort of set this goal for, what are our guiding principles around our park system? We've got long range plans. So our master plans, our CIP, capital improvement plan. So we have a lot of different pieces of our park system in terms of the design and construction of our parks that are set through other planning processes. But our comprehensive plan takes this sort of larger umbrella policy approach to all different aspects of our system. And so the question was, what are the things that should be driving our park system over the next 10 plus years? I know there was a question about how we landed at 3036 as our end date. And as we were moving through the process, we were sort of on the dovetailing in some ways with the city's comprehensive planning process, and realized that in the next iteration of the plan, it would probably make sense to do community engagement together. We might still develop different plans, but there might be some really interesting ways that we can build off each other's questions or work with community, work with stakeholders, so we're not sort of going out right after the city goes out, or they're not going out right after we go out to ask folks what matters. So that was a big reason for why the timeline shifted from just a decade to a slightly longer frame, where we would align with the city's next comprehensive planning process. So in that, as we developed the plan, some of the early stages of community engagement, there was a number of themes that were identified as really critical issues for us to be looking at into the future of parks in Minneapolis. We also did a field scan across the nation and even globally around what topics do park systems need to really be thinking about, both the challenges and the sort of assets and opportunities. And out of that, there was a number of work groups that were formed around these 9 topics. So from water resources to public safety to youth and recreation. So just to give you a sense of these work group themes. And then we brought together academics, activists, park board staff, agency partners, youth, artists, all around a single topic area. So, for example, the water resources work group. It was folks with all different perspectives, but knowledge about that topic. So expertise, but many different sort of vantage points on that point or that topic. And they work together to develop policy recommendations for the park board. And always grounding it in this question of how do we measure it? What's our role? What's our stake? And so out of that came the strategies. And so that's why I say that the plan was really written by 150 people. It's all those folks on those work groups. And then we had the fun role of sort of distilling and pattern spotting. And we actually got all of the work groups together and did that through a park summit. Unfortunately, of course, COVID hit. So it was a really complicated time to convene people and slowed down our process some, but I think we found our footing and made it through. Thanks to President Forney and all the commissioners for bearing with all of it. And I'm just so grateful we got it adopted and are now working on implementing. And so I'm going to turn it over to Madeline to share not necessarily the document. We were happy to also bring the document up, but wanted to focus the rest of our time with you on how are we measuring and tracking progress on the plan. There's some really exciting tools that she's developed with lots of consultation. You'll see that the data for tracking progress is a very collective effort. And there's so much data out there right now, and it's definitely an art to try to focus on what matters. And I think we're doing our best, and would love to hear your feedback as you explore these tools. Certainly, I imagine there will be more questions or even ideas on how to improve it. This is a new tool for us at the park board, and we are thinking of it as a dynamic thing, so we can make improvements. Certainly correct typos. I see Julia Wallace on this call, so she always catches my work, and I appreciate that. So thank you all, and I'll hand it over to Madeline to talk through a few different frames of tracking progress.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna share my screen here. We'll see each other for 1 second. Okay. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm sharing the right one here. Okay. So for the implementation and tracking, we have developed 3 different dashboards that we're using to track the comprehensive plan kind of from a data perspective. And if you're interested in finding out where all of these are located, if you're on the Park Board's main website and go to the About Us tab, and then underneath where it says 2023 to 2026 strategic directions, there's a Parks for All implementation and tracking page. And that'll take you to the page that'll give you links to all 3 of our kind of primary dashboards. So I'm going to highlight kind of 2 of them. But for all 3 of them, the kind of finest level of detail that we have for tracking the comprehensive plan is the implementation plan dashboard. And this has details on very specific strategies that are being worked on and kind of being advanced. And so you can look here to get some more details on some specific actions that are being taken. And they're all grounded in the comprehensive plan, as well as a couple of other system-wide policy documents that the park board has. And so then the next level up is our strategies dashboard, which is highlighting how the park board's connecting the work that's being done to the strategies themselves. And then our highest level of tracking is the goals dashboard, which is looking at how the park board's work overall that is impacting both the park board, Minneapolis, and the Twin Cities. So today I'm going to focus on the strategies dashboard and the goals dashboard. So the strategies dashboard has a couple of different pages. We're going to start on the page that has all of the strategies in the plan. And the focus of this page is really showing how the frequency that the various strategies in the plan are showing up in work across the park board. So if you look at this top chart here, it kind of, all of the goals are color coded to what you see in the plan document. So it gives you kind of a visual glance. Goal 3 here is kind of showing up as one of the most frequently used goals, and a couple of the strategies are kind of showing up rather frequently. The most frequent being the Goal 3 Strategy 11, which is to design and implement parks that are welcoming, climate resilient, ecologically healthy, playful, beautiful, and safe as they age. And then beyond Goal 3 strategies, it looks like there's a couple that are under Goal 1 that have popped to the top, as well as one in Goal 4 here. So you can click on any of these charts and it will kind of filter for that specific thing. If you're interested in kind of exploring in that respect. Otherwise, if you want to see kind of the full written out strategies here, you can go and look at this chart. And if you want to filter or organize by frequency, you can click that at the top and then see what those top most used strategies are right now and how they're showing up in the work. So all of what you're seeing here in terms of frequency of use is being pulled from a number of different sources of work that the park board does. The largest of those sources being board actions. So anytime a board action is submitted for review, you have to select some goals and or strategies that connect to that particular action that you're submitting. The recommendation is typically to put 2 or 3. Sometimes that varies a little bit. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but all of that information is being put into this dashboard, and we're pulling it kind of on an annual basis. So right now, what you're seeing here is a culmination of the strategies that were used in 2022 and 2023. So this time next year, you'll see 3 years worth of board action. So I imagine this bar is going to get even bigger. In addition to board actions, we also have the strategies that are being used in the implementation plan, and those are showing up here as well as community engagement plans. So anytime we have a project that involves some public community engagement, we create community engagement plan documents, and within those you can select goals and strategies. And so that's another way that that the strategies in the plan are being grounded in work across the park board. And then the last item in here right now is the MPRB accomplishments, which are something that staff can submit and have as sort of highlights of what various departments are working on. And they could be on a number of different things. So, and that one's a little bit light as a source at the moment. Hopefully we'll work to increase that as time goes on here. And these are the 4 sources we've got right now. We also have some additional sources that we're working towards incorporating as time goes on and as we're able to work towards digitizing some of the different processes, because a lot of this information comes from different forms that we have. And so finding different ways to be able to enhance processes so that we can more easily pull data in is something that we continue to explore as time goes on. So that's all of the strategies in the plan. And then there are also priority strategies, which are selected every 4 years with the board, that the newly adopted board. And so the current priority strategies for 2023 to 2026 are shown on this page here. And you can see the distribution across the different goals. So goal 1 has the most strategies that are currently being prioritized. And if you want to see what those are, you can go into the goals themselves, and there's pluses that you can keep going until you get to the kind of finest level of detail there. So within goal 1, we can see that goal 1, strategy 11 is showing up as kind of the most frequently used of the priority strategies for goal 1. And that's to cultivate long-term relationships with community members, leaders, artists, and community and cultural organizations to inform design, community engagement, and programming of parks. So you can see that one is showing up rather frequently as far as the priority strategies go. And then we can also see where there may be some room for improvement in terms of how often it's showing up across work. So for example, goal 1, strategy 14, has only been used once so far in the last 2 years. And that one is to elevate voices of those most impacted by health disparities and environmental injustice to inform policies, programming, activities, and services in parks. So these again are strategies that we're working on for this current 4 years. So there's still time for us to be able to incorporate more uses of these things across the work that we're doing at the park board. But this is a way for you to be able to see kind of where, how often these strategies are being used. So that is the goals or the strategies dashboard. And now we're going to move to the goals dashboard, which again is kind of that highest level of tracking of the comprehensive plan. So Within the comprehensive plan, as was mentioned in the video, there's 9 goals. And during the development of the comprehensive plan within those work groups that Carrie mentioned, and just in general community engagement, there were some ideas that were generated about some of the different possible data that we would be able to use to try to track things over time. And so within the implementation chapter of the comprehensive plan document, there's actually a table for each of the goals that sort of highlights some suggested data sources as well as some suggested questions that could be asked. And so those were what were used as the basis for this dashboard website. And the intention with this site is to really build it out over time. We tried to use the available data and tried to think of things and utilize things that we would have reliable information and data for over kind of a period of time. And it's hard to predict 15 years out. So we were at least trying to think of things that we would have available to us regularly for the next few years, most certainly. And over time, if this can kind of be modified too, if there are sources that we end up sunsetting and maybe have something else replace it instead. So as you go through the site, you can see sort of what these indicator questions are. And then when you click on the explore button, it will bring you into the different charts. It'll bring you right to that chart. So there's a page for each of the goals, and I'm just going to highlight goal 6. This is one of my favorite charts. In goal 6, which is to strengthen ecological connections, of course, a lot of the data here is really environmentally focused. With these first couple charts I'm going to show, they're all focused on tree-related things in the urban forest. So each of the charts has that indicator question at the top, which is sort of that big picture thing that we're trying to use data to help understand. And then there's at least one chart underneath each question. Sometimes there's more if we are able to find multiple sources and be able to tell kind of a more well-rounded story if there's multiple perspectives that may come into play for a question. In the case of the resiliency of the urban forest, right now, we've got the percentage of the public street trees by their genus. And because we have a wealth of forestry data that goes back quite a few years and has been consistent in terms of how it's been presented, we are able to backdate some of the data. So in most cases, the data is going to start around 2022 or 2023. But if in the case like this, where we had data that goes back further, we were able to add that. And over time, this chart will just show 15 years worth of data. So as we get further along in the advancement of the comprehensive plan kind of moving forward, some of these older years will eventually drop off. But for now, gives you a really pretty picture of the diversity of the trees. And as you kind of look through the chart, you can see how there are more colors over time, which is showing that increase in diversity. And so when you look at the bottom of each chart, we give you a general sense of what the park board would consider to be success. So in the case of the tree species diversity, we want that to increase over time. And then we'll document what agency we got the source data from, and then give you a sense of how often you can expect to see the data available. So in this case, it's on an annual basis. And depending on what the source is, we have some in the chart that are available generally every 3 or so years. There's some data that's about every 5 years. We try to have things that could be available on an annual basis if possible, but it's just not the case for certain things. So this is resilient urban forest. And then if we keep going, we have one about the legacy of the urban forest, which is looking at tree removals and replacements. And again, this goes back to 2009 to show those removals and replacements over time. And you can see how things have shifted as the years have gone on. And for any of the charts that have that are associated with a strategic direction or a performance goal, those are noted in the chart here. So this particular one is associated with a performance goal. And so we have that listed here, which is just a level of detail beyond what we have otherwise in the dashboard in terms of what the success might look like. The performance goals provide a little bit of a finer level of definition of what that might be within the current priority strategy window. And then this last chart on the urban forest is looking at how big it is overall within Minneapolis. So this is looking at tree canopy cover. And for this particular item, there's also some additional context that's been added. And so that was done and is done on a couple of the different charts throughout the dashboard website to just provide some additional information. And all of the data that I've showed you with regard to the trees has mostly come from our forestry department and working with them to try to figure out what sources they have and also where we might be able to get data that is available by others. So this one, for example, is coming from the University of Minnesota. And as you can imagine, within all of the goals spanning across many different topics that the park board covers, there was a lot of conversation that went into developing this dashboard in particular to try to really understand what was available amongst our different departments data-wise, and again, what was most reliable that we could use. And then also kind of having some exploratory conversations about, if not now, might it be something that we could revisit in the future. And so I have a back-end spreadsheet with all of this information that's tracked so that at different intervals throughout the year, I'm able to provide or put the updated data into the dashboard by making those requests to the different departments. So this chart, I'm just going to show one more, which is an example of when we've got a couple of different data points that can go into one of the indicator questions. So this one is looking at how the park board is realizing the ecological system. So one of those angles is looking at the acres of the managed natural areas. And then there's also another angle which is focused on resiliency projects within MPRB park plans and how we are advancing those. So kind of these are actually from two different departments. This is from our environmental management department, and then this one is being tracked within strategic planning. So sometimes multiple perspectives from different parts of the organization, sometimes just different angles to kind of look at things. So a lot of different things, different ways to look at things. So that's the goals dashboard. Talked about the strategies dashboard, and I think we might, I can turn it back over to you, Lisa.
Yeah, I'll just jump back in. Thank you so much, Madeline. And then we're happy to open it up for questions. I think on more of an anecdotal front, you know, one of the great things about all of these tools is that it's keeping the plan in front of staff, in front of community, and we're really operationalizing the strategies all the time, right? So any funding commitment at the board or approval at the board, any political approval at the board, it's grounded in the plan strategies. But I also see it showing up in ways like staff groups, departments, divisions are doing work planning with the plan. So CCVP, the Community Connections and Violence Prevention Group, is a relatively now a couple years old department, and they pulled relevant strategies from the plan and said, hey, we're going to actually say, what does it mean for us to ground the work of our department in these 5 strategies over the next few years as we develop our work plan. And it was really helpful to them, but also it gave them policy guidance and policy grounding that was approved by the board. So when questions arose, either from community or the board, they were able to say, hey, we have policy direction. We have a mandate, in a sense, to do this work And this is our way of being accountable to the community that gave input to this plan, our way of being accountable to the board that committed us to this plan. So I think that it's been really exciting to see it show up in so many different ways in our agency. If you see our board meetings or come to the board meetings, we've even got the goals on the back wall, just kind of keeping them, in our mind's eye all the time. And I see people at least once a month refer to the goals on the wall or a certain goal and say, hey, we promise we do that. And I think also there was the mural project. I don't know if folks saw that there was a number of murals that went up around the system last year. And there was actually a mural developed on walls that were frequent targets of vandalism for the goals of the comprehensive plan. So we're actually putting them on the walls of our system and our promise to community, right, of like what we say we're going to do, and also a celebration of all the work that went into it. So yeah, with that, we'll pause and open it up for questions. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Well, I have a question right off the bat. And that is, do you have a place where we can see, or do you know what the current park board's priorities are? Which of the goals they've chosen as their priorities for this 4-year span?
Yeah, I'll let Madeline bring the priority strategies up.
Yeah, so I put a link in the chat. But also if you're on the park board website and go to the About Us tab, under that 2023 to 2026 strategic direction blue, there's one that says priority comprehensive plan strategies. So if you click on that, it'll then show you how the priority strategies are organized by the current board's 5 strategic directions. So if you click that, it'll show you how they're organized that way. Or if you keep scrolling, you can go to how they're organized within the 9 goals. So you can see them written out here. Otherwise, if you wanted to see them with how often they've been showing up within the work that the board's been doing, or the organization has been doing, you can find that in that strategies dashboard if you go to that second page. And this will show you the distribution of the priority strategies across the 9 goals. And then you can also see that frequency of how they're being used across the organization in a variety of different ways.
And this is actually the priority strategy process and grounding the strategic directions which are set by the board, right? They're a new board, they're forming, they're saying, hey, what do we want to do as a board? What are the things that are really important to us as a board? There's always this sort of onboarding quarter or 2 in their first year. And in those conversations, in this case, it was the first time that they really worked closely with the comprehensive plan to ground that process. And they said, we have these strategic directions, but we're going to also attach strategies to those strategic directions. So we generally agree on these 5 areas and that they're important, but we're going to look back to our comprehensive plan and say, what is the overall community and staff and agency partners and all those thousands of voices that went into this plan, what do they believe is important, and how do our priorities reinforce those? There's also, close to 150 strategies in the plan, so it's a great way to help us focus what it is that we should be doing as staff in the agency in the term of the current board.
Do you have a visual showing us how the parks are being used? What is the largest percentage of participation by users, and how does that show up in your plan?
So I think that's a slightly different place that I'd point us to for that information. And luckily, Madeline works a lot with our park counts. And really, those are primarily focused on our regional system, the regional part of our system. As folks probably know, we we think of neighborhood parks and regional parks as two different types of parks in our system, in part because they're funded from different pots of funding. But those, the park count data would be the best space for that. I will say it's a little bit of a data gap for us, though, comprehensively for the entire system. We are working on methods for tracking actual park use in a systematic way. Hopefully to also understand not only how many people, but who are the people that are using our parks. That's a really important piece of the equity side of this work, is to say, it matters that people are coming to our parks and visiting, but we also want to make sure that the diversity of our city is reflected in the people using our parks. And so as we're developing data points, for neighborhood park use measurement, we are trying to find ways to do that. So the regional parks, which the annual use estimates, this is a page I'll let Madeline speak to. It's collected and summarized by Met Council, our regional park funder.
Yeah, so the annual use estimates are developed by the Metropolitan Council. The Park Board is one of 10 implementing agencies across the 7-county metro area that has regional parks and trails. So in our system, we've got quite a few of them. I think a few notable ones, or ones people think of, are the Minneapolis Chain of Lakes Regional Park, which includes Brownie, Cedar, Lake of the Isles, Betay-McCoska, and Lake Harriet. Minnehaha Regional Park is another one with the falls. And then we've got a lot of the other kind of larger natural resource-based parks and trails in our system are within the regional system. So every summer we have do park counts and provide that data to the Met Council, and they produce a annual use estimate that's based on a 4 years average of data. And so those are on their public website. And then in complement with those use estimates, every 5 years, they also do a visitor study. The most recent visitor study came out in 2021, and they're actually currently gearing up for another visitor study that'll take place in the summer of 2025. They're a little off on their cycle because of the pandemic. They didn't get to do the study in 2020 as they expected. So in this case, it's a 4-year gap, but that'll be something that'll be happening next summer. So you may end up getting asked if you're out in the regional system to participate in the study, and that's where that information goes. And the visitor study is, along with the use estimates, are how the regional park system gets the distribution of funding. And so they're both critical components to how the Park Board gets their distribution of the funds from those other 10 agencies. And we do have, just on the data front, there is a performance goal, a current performance goal around transit and park access, which is thinking about park visitors and from kind of a transit and how much time are they staying in the park kind of angle. And so that's actually a performance goal I've been working on. And I think we're exploring some different options with this, but we might be able to, through this performance goal, over time, get some additional data that we might be able to put towards the neighborhood system. It's still a work in progress. This isn't a completed performance goal yet, but something that we have our eye on for sure.
So we have a question in the chat, and I think it kind of dovetails into another, which the question in the chat says, how did Parks for All play into the recent decision to reorder priorities to divert funding to North Commons Park? And I think that also maybe dovetails into how does the NPP, I don't know, is it Neighborhood Park Program 20, sort of work with the comprehensive plan?
Yeah, good question.
I assume that it's a neighborhood park.
Yeah, so the neighborhood park, the 20-year neighborhood park plan is focused on neighborhood parks, as the name suggests, and is a funding source, right, for improvements to neighborhood park system. So our capital improvement program, aka our budget for capital improvements in parks, for construction in parks, for design of parks, is based on, what's the most exciting thing with the MPP 20 in my mind is it's based on an equity metric. And those are, it's basically criteria that looks at not only the park, but also the communities surrounding the parks. And so funding is prioritized for parks that get a higher equity score, which includes criteria like, more racially diverse communities, lower wealth communities, communities with higher youth population rates. So I can share more about all of the criteria if there's interest, but I would say that there's absolutely basis and support for those types of approaches in the comprehensive plan. So there's a really big emphasis on taking a data-driven approach to decision making, number one. Number two, there's equity that shows up in all sorts of different ways. There's actual, a goal around equity. There's equity shows up in strategies. It shows up in the futures that we're planning for, because our region is getting more diverse, and we have a responsibility to serve the people of Minneapolis and the region. And so how do we do that? Even in the workforce, there's a workforce goal, and there's quite a bit around diversifying our workforce. We have a lot of retirements happening and ahead of us. And so how do we make sure that the folks that are in our city now, our younger population who is more diverse, are going to be ready to step into those jobs? So those are all questions we're grappling with around the equity question. But back to the North Commons piece specifically, I'd be curious to see which strategies were attached to that board action. It was a really interesting strategy with how do we bring resources to the north side of Minneapolis, which does have, if you look at another data source for us is the Trust for Public Land park score. And certainly that's one of the neighborhoods where it shows up where there's more of a park gap for us, meaning people, aren't as served quite as well geographically by parks, at least the size of those parks. And so how do we write the historic inequities of our system? And again, there's a number of strategies and sort of policy guidance for that in the comprehensive plan. And in fact, it's baked into the new mission, the idea of dismantling historic inequities. So in my mind, it was a tough decision. I know there was a lot of really, and I can't speak to all the details and nitty gritty of what went into that, but certainly I would say there is guidance both in the mission, strategy, and goal level in the comprehensive plan for that particular move.
I just want to point out to everyone too that I guess is it Madeline who's putting all kinds of links in the chat?
Yes.
I will save the chat and I can send it out maybe with when we send the study guide to all members, so that you have all these great links for yourselves. And you guys also could save the chat if you wanted to, but in case you don't know how, I'll just add it to the guide. Margaret, does that add to your question? Wasn't it, Margaret?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
You showed us some data about how you measure things that are the sorts of things you can measure kind of easily, like counting how many trees you planted and that sort of thing. But some of the goals and priorities are more, what should we say, much more difficult to count when we talk about diversity things or whether you're improving people's lives in various ways. Can you show us any examples of how you measure those more sociological things rather than the concrete ones?
That is a great question. I am looking at the goals dashboard here to try to see if we've got any good examples to show. I mean, quite honestly, as you kind of mentioned when you were asking your question, thinking about that qualitative component is kind of a challenge when trying to think about how to track over time. So there are, I don't know if we have anything that specifically is going to have that qualitative component that I can think of. Carrie, is there one that comes to mind for you?
I think let's look at, like, for example, safety. You know, that's a big one in terms of it's both a perception. So it was a tricky one to measure, but then we did find a data source that helped us talk about, which is, it's much more of a feeling, right, of what it's like to be in a park. And so this was a tricky one to find data that felt like it was helping us understand not only actual safety but perceived safety. And that's an example of the kind of negotiation that we did. And I would say it's certainly a qualitative aspect of our parks, but maybe you could speak to this one for us, Madeline.
Sure. So with this one, earlier I'd mentioned that we tried to find ways to kind of balance perspectives, and this is definitely one that comes to mind when I say that, because it does have, is looking at kind of the approximate number of violent crimes that are reported in parks and take place on parkland. So that's more of a concrete kind of numbers piece, but it's really only telling kind of a piece of the story, because as Carrie mentioned, there's also that perception of safety piece. And so we do have, the park board does a citywide survey, which does have some more qualitative questions in it. And a lot of those questions have maintained or have been the same, at least from the 2019 to 2022. And then there were also some that were still the same going back to the 2015 survey. And so part of trying to keep some of those questions the same is so that we could actually see change over time. And so because of that kind of methodology thought with that survey, we've been able to pull a couple of questions, which those would be the, I'd say, most qualitative aspects of the pieces in the dashboard. And so this is showing you what the question was that was asked, and then we highlighted the ones that were responding with a lot and somewhat as the responses. So it doesn't give every one of those options, but trying to kind of hit the high point here in terms of what we're looking at and kind of the question that we're answering.
Which is pretty interesting to see that, like, from 2020 to 22, crimes actually taking place in the park went down quite a bit, but perception of safety in the park got worse during those 2 years. And so do they do anything with this data, as in, is there any part of the parks department that says, we should, like, get the word out that actually the parks are getting safer, not less so? Or is there,
Yeah, good question.
that?
I mean, this actually, the violent crime data did come, it was a source of data that comes in collaboration with our police department, and they certainly are keeping a very close eye on this. And so this is a good example too of where we got our data from, was a collaborative effort. And so they absolutely are using this data in ways that we will, I can't represent, but it's actively using this data. And then communications department, we've really worked hard to dovetail the dashboards that you see here with our annual report and with social media posts, and trying to really streamline and create patterns around the way we're telling stories. So this dashboard might be a statistic that shows up in the annual report, and then there might be some narrative that is highlighted to really amplify a story to represent that. And so we're actually using the goals to structure our annual report now, which is also a new kind of accountability tool for us, with just, again, grounding ourselves in the comprehensive plan, in the patterns that it's helping us to set.
Do you ask the staff of the park board for input, in terms of either going towards your strategies or goals, what they've been actually doing or seeing since they're on actually feet on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are showing up in those forms that we first looked at with the one of the dashboards. So the occurrences of strategies that are showing up in different documents, those will be submitted by directors either through an accomplishment form or community engagement form or board action. So we're seeing, you know, the work that's being done sort of operationalized through these different documents, even like travel and training requests. So that's another source that we're working on getting data from, what strategies in our comprehensive plan are driving the travel and training requests that staff are making. So making sure that we're, you know, every step of the way, we're again grounding it. But I do think, again, that idea of having policy guidance or policy grounding or policy support for a new program or an existing program or a change or a budget request are really powerful. And, you know, we do set budgets as departments and divisions, and we also ground our budget creation process in strategies, and specifically in the priority strategies. So the ones that the board has identified as the most important for us to focus on in this 4-year period.
One of the things I found really interesting when I was doing my research before this was about the process that you guys undertook before you actually made the plan, and the like 2.5, 3 years of public input that you got, and how it was organized around themes. And I don't know, I found some tables and things talking about, you know, with all the different groups that you met with in neighborhoods or at summits or at PACs or the other groups, and like what were the repeated themes that they said, you know, this is what we want from our parks, this is what we want you to concentrate on. Do you guys have some metric, or I know there's some pages that show what that stuff is, not that I could find them again, but
yeah, Madeline's going to bring it up. We have a process page. So under the comprehensive planning page, you'll find there's some key, we'll sort of navigate you as we go so you can see where we're finding it. But there's actually a Parks for All process story map that talks about just what you were getting at. And this is where, again, back to that idea of the participatory policymaking. This page helps summarize all of the different things that went into that participatory process, all the different groups that gave input. Again, we did lots and lots of engagement when we first started the plan through online surveys and events. It was pre-pandemic, so you know, lots of folks out at different community events. We actually went around to almost every single neighborhood organization in the city to present and get their input. I think we made it to, you know, close to 70 out of there was somewhere around 80 that we were aiming to meet with. So really just out there. I think we were out probably 3 times a week. Also engaged leadership in the engagement process. So director of communications, director of HR, you know, they were sitting on work groups, but they were also out in community listening and saying what matters to you. So that was just, you know, one little kind of snapshot of how we were doing it. Then Madeline's scrolling through some photos here that we also hired community groups or offered small grants to community groups to convene their own conversations and then share information with us. So these are the community collaborators. For example, there was a Hmong elder care group that went and did a photo shoot and a fitness class in Loring Park and had a bus go there, and then collected oral histories around the importance of parks to them, and sort of talked about park access. So really interesting sort of findings from that day with them. There's so much more. I mentioned the youth design team. We did have a number of forums that we put together, including forums like around Indigenous acknowledgement. We had a public forum online with a number of Dakota knowledge keepers who advised the park board on policies that we should be included in our comprehensive plan. But it was a forum, so it was also open to the public to come and listen and ask questions. Yeah, so this one's a fun page for us to look back at. And thanks for highlighting. We had so much fun in the process and the planning process. It did go very long due to the pandemic.
Oh, which is maybe why they added 6 months onto the original. Yeah, I have a comment here in the chat from Julia Wallace saying that the League of Women Voters and Minneapolis Parks Committee prepared extensive comments that were approved by the board and we submitted to the park board. And that reminds me also that you came and talked to us in looked like the spring of 2019.
Yep.
Talked to us about the planning process as well. And I assume got some input.
Black Forest or something. Is that where we were? We were
somewhere. Right. Back when we were always in person.
I know. Yes, I remember that. And I remember the comments. So thank you for your thoroughness.
This is Margaret Berg. I just wanted to say 2 things that in the last 24 hours I've noticed that things I've read about the parks and their planning process. It was probably at the next level down, more at the district or the regional level. And one was today's newspaper talking about the plan for moving the sailing from the northeast corner to the northwest corner of Hudek, and that is part of in the plan. And just, I don't know which particular goal or strategy within Parks for All really spoke to that, but that's definitely, I'm sure, has a home someplace in that plan. And then the other one, I just was reading the Loring Park newsletter, and they were talking about the long range plans for that park. And it's fun to see the actual implementation going on.
Oh yeah, it is for us too. So we'll just flash before you there is a current projects page that we can show you next, and then this is the adopted master plans, or we're starting to move away from the terminology of master plan and trying to use like regional park plan or long range plan, vision plan. So you'll start to see that language appear more and more in our long range planning processes. But here is the suite of adopted plans that are guiding, for the most part, the physical improvements in our system. And you should be able to find, for Chain of Lakes would be where you might find the Hudek, the new site that you mentioned. And so, yeah, this is a great resource, and this is our policy direction as staff. So when there's a capital improvement allocation or a budget allocation to a park, this is what we use to drive the implementation of that or the use of that. So the capital improvement program says how much funding is getting allocated to a park and when it's getting allocated to a park. But these plans are the things that tell us, as they give us policy guidance on what should be implemented in that park when that funding is allocated. And I think Madeline's probably bringing up the capital improvement program. So this is also a wonderful new tool that I believe Madeline has been involved in creating also. But you can search for by park for when funding is allocated to that park and when it hasn't been allocated to that park. And then also what the sources are. There's a breakdown of where that funding is coming from. So I use this tool weekly. It's a great one for
nice
talking about.
Interactive map.
Mm-hmm.
Very handy for those who are more visual. I gotta say, we are actually over time a little bit. So if nobody else has a burning question, we really should wrap it up and let our guests go. I'm sure it's been a really long day. If you're still in the office.
Well, it's so fun to talk about this. So thanks for asking. It means a lot that you're watching and holding us accountable. And please, I just feel like you all do great work, and we really appreciate the eyes and ears and the passion for our city and our parks. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate so much. So I'll officially thank our guests, Carrie Christensen and Madeline Hudek from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. I'll remind you all that our event has been recorded, and so you'll be able to find that on our Civic Buzz website, League of Women Voters Minneapolis and Civic Buzz. And that's all I got. Thank you so much for participating and for being involved in our city.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Carrie. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hi.
I'm recording.